My parents loved to play cards. They were part of a circle of friends that met at different houses, had potluck dinners, and played cards for the rest of the evening. I usually went with them, but that evening, I was getting over some kind of flu bug. I was camped out on the living room couch, reading a book. I'd asked Mama to close the curtains that faced me because the sun was in my eyes. I was still weak, and getting up was an effort. Mama did close the curtain for me, which was a big help later on. It was still daylight when my parents left. The late afternoon sun was pouring in the back windows. My cat, Whiskers, was draped over the back of a chair, dozing in a warm sunspot. My old dog, Julie, was in a similar sunspot on the living room rug. I was reading my book, and all was right with the world, peaceful and quiet. I must have dozed off. I woke up startled to hear my cat hissing and my dog growling. I'd never heard her growl like that before, a low rumble that still continued with the intake of breath. Julie had moved over to stand stiffly next to me, facing the front door. I could see the doorknob moving. Fortunately, the deadbolt above the knob was locked. I was still kind of befuddled when I heard someone moving to the kitchen window. They must have had sand on their shoes because I could hear the crunchy noise as they stepped across the porch. I was instantly awake. It was fully dark at that point. All the curtains were still open, except the one Mama had closed for me. The only light on was the one I'd been reading under. I might as well have been under a spotlight. I was in a nightgown. I'd gotten hot, so I'd untied my wrap robe, which had slid open. I was in a jam. What to do? Before whoever it was got to the window, I rolled off the couch and flattened myself against it. We had an old cedar chest as a coffee table at that time. I pulled up my legs so I couldn't be seen from the window. Julie was barking wildly now, and the cat had darted under something. I had to move. I would be in full view from the next window. I got up, dizzy, and moved across the living room to the closed curtain toward the phone. My dog was now leaping at one of the windows, her teeth bared, barking furiously. But whoever it was, wasn't leaving. I had a hunch they knew I was alone. How long had they been watching me before my dog started to growl? What really spooked me was that a barking dog wasn't scaring them off. There wasn't anyone around to hear my dog. The campground close to us was closed for the winter. We had the only house among weekend cabins. Unfortunately, it was Wednesday. I got to the phone by moving along the wall, at one point pressed up against the wall under the window he was looking into. Yes, I was sure it was a man. From the height and the broad shoulders of the jacket, I glimpsed when he moved away from one of the other windows. I lifted the phone and realized it was dead. At the same time, I heard the back door being tried. I froze for a minute because the back door had a glass window. I was dizzy and starting to panic, until I remembered that my stepdad had a different phone line put into his office at the other end of the house. I got up and ran down the hallway with my dog into his office and locked the door behind me, just in case. Thank goodness that phone was working. I called my stepdad at the house where they were playing cards. It was only a mile away. The sheriff's station was on the other side of the lake. I needed someone to come fast. It took me a while to get him to understand with the dog barking, and I was a blethering idiot at this point. Finally, I yelled, "Help! Come now! Someone is breaking in! They've cut the other phone line. If they get in, I'm going out another door and hiding outside." I was so dizzy, everything was spinning. I sat down on the floor under his desk, where I wouldn't be seen from the window, and hoped I wouldn't have to run outside. My dog found me and stood guard over me. She was no longer barking, but her hackles were still up, and her lips were curled away from her teeth. That frightened me more than when she was barking. It was like she knew not to draw attention to where I was. It seemed like forever, but it was just a few minutes when I heard a siren. Turns out, some of the people my parents were playing cards with were deputies. Daddy and one deputy came into the house to find me, while a couple of guys and another deputy looked around outside. I was shaking, cold with shock, and the office wasn't heated, so I was just plain old cold. The window on the back door had been broken. There was blood on it where the guy cut himself. The doorknob lock had been opened, but the deadbolt was one you needed a key to open, so he couldn't get in. They caught the guy the next day. This was something that happened to me about a year ago, and no matter how hard I try, I just can't explain it. I eventually put it down to being very tired. I had just worked a 12-hour shift and was hearing things. I told myself each time I remembered it. Yet, it still sends chills down my spine every time. I work in an eye clinic that caters to everything from simple vision tests to ocular emergencies and minor eye surgeries. It was very late one Friday night, and I found myself still at work. After seeing our last patient and locking up for the day, I decided to stay back a couple of hours to prepare paperwork for a big patient list coming up the following week. A 3-day weekend was on the horizon, and I knew none of my coworkers would finish it on time if I didn't step in. I thought I'd do my due diligence. I was seated at a desk on the office side of the clinic. An hour into my work, I started hearing what sounded like objects falling off shelves. From my position, I couldn't see what was happening, but it was so quiet that I could hear even the smallest sounds around me. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the fluorescent lights. I shook off the creeping dread that settled in. Don't be silly, I thought, and I forced my attention back to the paperwork. Moments later, a faint whisper echoed through the stillness. So soft, I thought I had imagined it. I chose to ignore it, pushing it deep down to keep my focus. Then came another whisper. This time it was louder, lingering in the air, but I still couldn't make out the words. It was enough to make me stop and scan the room, convinced that someone else was in the clinic with me. My mind raced, and I was overcome with fear. But from my years of nursing training, I forced myself to keep panic at bay. After what felt like an eternity, I conducted a nervous sweep of the clinic, armed only with my phone, ready to call for help or, worse, use it as a weapon. I found no one. Not a single soul. That should have brought relief, but instead the emptiness felt even more terrifying. I felt like one of those characters in horror movies, sensing that something bad was about to happen. The stillness, the silence, everything felt too surreal, too unsettling. That's it. I'm finishing up here and leaving, I declared to myself, trying to dismiss the creeping fear. To fill the oppressive silence, I began humming as I made my way back to the office. But just as I sat down, an overwhelming heaviness washed over me. It was an unsettling, indescribable sensation. In the moments it took for me to return to my desk, my anxious thoughts dissolved into a fog. My fear faded into a pulsing thrum in my throat, replaced by a deep, inexplicable sadness. It washed over me like a dark wave, as if I had just lost someone dear to me. I wanted to cry, to scream, but my rational mind insisted there was no reason to grieve. My eyes darted around the empty space. I could see no one, but I could feel a presence lurking close by. In an instant, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, like when someone hovers too closely. Then I heard it again, a whisper, but this time loud, slow, and chillingly clear, "She's here." I can't recall how I made it outside, but suddenly I was calling an Uber home, trembling and a complete wreck. When I arrived, I spilled everything to my partner. We had the most profound spiritual conversation we'd had in ages, and even though we weren't religious, we found ourselves praying together, searching for solace. As I said, I still don't understand what it all meant. Was the voice simply acknowledging my presence? Or was it a warning telling me that someone or something else was there and that I should leave? What's even stranger, and this is the part I struggle to explain, I felt that the presence with me felt familiar. It's a strange notion, one I can't quite grasp, but it lingered in my mind. It felt as though I had encountered it before, that we shared a connection, however inexplicable. Needless to say, I refused to stay after hours on my own ever since. My wife and I recently moved out of a home that I can only describe as messed up. The house caused so much anger and hatred. Whatever entity resides in the home is either menacing or pure evil. Even as soon as my wife moved into the home when she was a child, she told me a story of when her and her little brother were playing one night in his room. They were playing with a leapfrog-type device. She described in detail about how she was showing her brother how to use it, and it began to act strange. Strange sounds came out of it, and then a man's voice began screaming from it. She said it was saying something about a list, something about making mistakes, screaming and cursing until she turned it off. I met my wife a few years ago. We decided that since it was the logical thing to do, I would move in with her. Sweet, no problem. At the time, I worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. This will come up later. After a few weeks of moving in, I noticed something strange about the house. The upstairs where we lived seemed menacing in a way, like someone was in the other room waiting for you. At first, I brushed it off as just being nervous. New house, new life kind of thing. I also thought it was from the pretty much steady insomnia work was causing me. As time went on, I began noticing more and more. Whenever the house should have been dead silent, things would happen. Footsteps up and down the hallways, knocks on doors, and sometimes I would swear I heard whispers. Being an avid believer in spirits, I wasn't particularly afraid, until things started getting dark. One morning, as I was lying in bed, watching Netflix and hoping to fall asleep, I heard a rustling from the closet. It was just light enough in the room that you could make everything out. I saw nothing and thought maybe it was just the fan. Something moved out of the corner of my eye, and as I looked at the closet, a dark ball moved from the closet to the bedroom door. It was about the size of a softball and moved about as fast as a person could to the door. Later into the week, my wife had gotten into the bad habit of sleeping with the closet light on. So we're lying there talking about baby stuff. Then we both noticed the curtain that covered the closet opening move. My wife was curled into me facing my chest, and I was staring at the closet. As I kept watching, I saw what I can only describe as a tiny mist-like figure. Not like white mist, but slightly darker than the rest of the background move out from the closet. It was maybe 3 feet tall and vanished as quick as it appeared. As soon as I began telling my wife what had happened, she had a sharp pinch on her back. She didn't cry out or scream. She calmly turned around and shouted, "Get out and leave us alone." Too bad it didn't work. Let's fast forward. You're probably wondering, what else happened? Well, small stuff here and there for a while. Footsteps were regular. The footsteps was stretching out the entire length of the 20-foot hallway. They sometimes were fast. And the knocks on the doors were very rhythmic. You know, like when you knock on a friend's door when they're home or something. After this recent Christmas, things began to spark up to a new level. One day, I was sitting on my computer and my wife came into the room asking me what I needed from the store. The computer room was directly across from the bathroom. Our daughter's door was to the immediate left of that, and the stairs were to the right. I began telling my wife what I wanted when she looked out the door and turned ghost white. Her eyes got big and her mouth dropped. She slowly turned toward me. I just saw a man walk into Elena's room. She begins describing what it looked like. It was about 6 feet tall, black, and only slightly translucent. While she's describing this, I walk out into the hallway and go into my daughter's room. Have you ever walked into a freezer, like the ones Walmart stocks ice cream in? That immediate chill is what I felt when I walked in there. There was nothing, of course, but as soon as we began walking out, a set of metal bed frames we had laying against the wall for over a year, I might add, slid down and fell to the floor. My wife turned back into the room and told whatever it was to get out of our home. But it didn't, of course. Come January, things really picked up before we moved out. The power got knocked out during a sudden storm and we were left in the dark for a night. My wife at this point wanted nothing to do with the home and wanted to stay at her dad's. So we began packing her things for the night. I went downstairs and got my daughter loaded up in the car, and as I started walking back in, my wife shot out of the door nearly in tears. I asked her what was wrong and she only said simply, "I don't want to talk, close the door, let's go." The upstairs to the home is pitch black, even on the brightest day due to the layout. So, when the power's off during an overcast, you might as well be underground. My wife was in our room gathering her makeup and things with only a flashlight. As she was loading things into her bag, she heard someone walk from the stairs, down the hallway, and right up against her back. She assumed it was me, but when she turned around, she saw nothing but black. Not like darkness, black. Imagine someone holding a black sheet in front of you. Something like that. Even on our moving out day, things were happening upstairs. It was the worst I've personally ever felt it. Just dread and sorrow. My wife once again had something walk up on her and heard knocks on the bedroom door while she was packing. We've gone back a few times to get a thing or two since we left in February. Every time it's terrifying walking up the stairs. but I feel as if I should end this on a high note. We moved into a brand new home, and it is a completely different experience here. It has helped our relationship and has taken a huge burden off of us.